Hello and welcome to this Hallelujah edition of the Purple Journal podcast. I am your host, whose mood dangerously changes from week to week, Joe Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com. Here with, we have a different lineup this week because Joe, OG Oberle, has apparently some sort of life and is on vacation. So
I think he's somewhere in the central Amazon assimilating into a tribe.
There you go, Machu Picchu. He's always we're gonna start a Where in the World is Joe Oberle segment soon here, but
I mean, if you see him, I mean, we're worried.
Yeah,
we haven't heard from him.
Post on social media if you see him. If you see any
Tweet at him.
Empty Mankato Brewery cans laying around, that'll help. That's Luke Braun. He's here. The consolation prize. And he writes for purplePTSD, and he is on our podcast, and he's also on the Pocket Protectors podcast, which is on the there's so many sites and my brain is so riddled.
On Climbing the Pocket.
Climbing the Pocket. I was going to say About the Pocket, but that's wrong.
Yes, if you subscribe to Climbing the Pocket, which you should, you will also get Pocket Protectors, and it's just a good smattering of good content.
Perfect. And amazingly, and you know, I'm still not used to introducing myself as the owner of Vikings Territory because I don't understand how that happened, and I also don't understand how we have AJ Mansour on the show.
Oh, what's up, guys?
Hey.
It took a long time to get this in action and get going, but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad it worked out, and I'm excited to talk about a Vikings team that there's a little more optimism about after this week.
You know, well, first, AJ, obviously, I'm sure if you guys are big enough fans to be listening to this podcast, you know who AJ is. He's a part of the Power Trip Morning Show, the producer, I believe, on KFAN, and he also contributes to purplePTSD once a week. Yeah, man, you know, when Joe's role in the show is kind of the older, more sage wisdom sort of person, is to provide perspective, and I'm a little more emotional, and he, like my dad, also always says, well, it's a long season and things change from week to week, but Christ, like, who could have seen this coming, you know? It's exciting. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm mad at the fact that Rodgers is out for the season, had surgery today or yesterday, but, you know, what are your guys' just initial thought? Are you guys super psyched, or?
Well, yeah, I'll jump in real quick, Luke. You know, no one's obviously, and I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth here, no one's psyched to see a good football player get injured. You know, the league is not as good without Aaron Rodgers. But, you know, I think that as a Vikings fan, as a kid who I've grown up here in Minnesota my whole life and cheered for the Vikings and somehow ended up covering them for an actual job, it's fun to see. You know, I'm just sick of the Green Bay Packers and their quarterbacks staying healthy all the time, dominating the division. It's weird how the ripple effect for one injury trickles down not only to the division, leaving it wide open with probably the Vikings in the driver's seat, but that it expands out to the conference and makes the playoffs picture for the NFC look different.
Yeah.
But it really puts even a 4-2 Minnesota Vikings team without a starting running back, without a starting quarterback, in a perspective where, you know, if we just don't screw it up, they should make the playoffs. And I think that that's something that people here in Minnesota are starving for, is this playoffs that includes the Minnesota Vikings and not the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, it's super great to be in a position where we aren't overshadowed by this, like, big brother juggernaut like we have been for the last, like, I don't know, my whole life.
Yeah. I was going to ask, AJ, how old are you?
I am 32 years old.
Okay, so I'm a year older than you, and you've accomplished so much more, so I think we should just end the show here.
I don't know about that.
But, yeah, our entire lives, basically, have been, as long as we've been cognizant of football, at least, the Packers have been favorites to win the division, or, you know, preseason favorites for the Super Bowl, just because they've had these quarterbacks. And so it's nice to have a kind of a breath of fresh air there, I guess. Not to interrupt Luke, but
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to, be in a division where you feel like, wow, if we, if we play the way that we're capable of playing, maybe we got a shot at winning this division, doing some damage in the playoffs. I think it's okay to feel excited about the Vikings' newfound path to the playoffs, while also lamenting the fact that a human broke his collarbone, and that sucks. And football and injuries is, football's a rough game with a lot of injuries, and the NFL is a lot less interesting without Aaron Rodgers in it, just because he is so prolific and so entertaining to watch from a neutral perspective. It's okay to feel both things, to lament the injury and to also be excited about the fact that the Vikings are in a better position now.
Yeah, I mean, if there is one person from a subjective point of view that you'd want to see get injured, it's obviously going to be Aaron Rodgers, and it's going to be just the circumstances in which it happened.
Or Joe Mixon.
Yeah, yeah. It was at US Bank Stadium. It happened relatively early in the game. It was Anthony Barr. There's been memes created for it that I find so gratifying. I don't know if you guys saw the one that was on Reddit and then on our social media, but it was pretty hilarious. But Ian, what are your guys' thoughts on? Obviously, I know living in Minnesota, we run into a lot of Green Bay fans, and I actually ran into quite a few. One of my social media clients is a liquor store in the neighborhood, and I ran over there after the game, and typically they're pretty before the game or during the week. They're wearing all their ATV outfits or hunting outfits with the colors. And
it's hunting, not hunting.
Hunting. There you go.
Good.
See, I'm a college boy, so I guess I don't understand murdering animals, but at least for meat. After the games, I like to strangle stray cats, but. They disappear. They go into the woodwork. I did hear a few people. I was wearing a Viking sweatshirt, just not out of rubbing it in anyone's face, but a few people were calling me a poor sport just for wearing Viking stuff after Rodgers got injured. What are your guys? Which is to be expected. I mean, I went to the U of M, and there's reciprocity, and there was just a ton of Minnesota hate from people going to the U of M, and it's like, what are you doing here in the first place? But that's a topic for another show or a therapy session. But what were your guys' thoughts on the hit? I mean, it wasn't flagged. It was after he got rid of the ball. In real time, it happened in a split second. When they slow it down, it looks like he kind of...
Yeah, slow motion always makes you think that things are more intentional than they are. And, that's been proven beyond football. That's just, a psychological... if you watch a car accident in slow motion, it'll look more like somebody was trying to, run someone off the road or whatever. People are just more intrinsically, driven to think that there's intent. The hit itself was out of the pocket, which means you don't get that one-step rule. You don't get a lot of the same protections. So the whole he took a step and a half, that's irrelevant when you're out of the pocket. You're treated a lot more like a running back. And the fact that the ball was gone and he was still a step or two away, if the expectation is supposed to be for Anthony Barr to back off when the ball is thrown, that leaves you so open and susceptible to pump fakes that that's just not a rule that you can possibly enforce without putting the defense at a horrible disadvantage. So
or any more of a disadvantage than they've been since Jim Irsay changed the rules.
And then the other thing that people see, and they see this in slow motion, is they see him drive him to the ground or something, but he pretty much left his feet on that tackle, or he didn't exactly have the leverage to even be able to drive Aaron Rodgers into the ground.
Yeah.
So for that to be purposeful, that would require something particularly superhuman, and I don't think would be physically possible. So the hit was clearly not intentionally dirty. He's just putting a hit on the quarterback like every football player ever does. It was out of the pocket, and it was correctly not flagged. I get why Packers fans are going to be angry and look for something to blame. We've been there. We kind of understand what they're going through, and they're going to be upset, and they're going to be really mad at the team that hurt their quarterback. But that's life. That's football. It's a tough game.
Yeah,
Luke, you said a couple important things there. The outside the pocket rules and how they differ and why they differ, especially with Aaron Rodgers. You talked about the pump fake, and that is one of those things that Aaron Rodgers specifically is so good at. I pulled a stat before the game for the pregame show. Something, I'm going to forget the exact numbers, but the sentiment will still be there. In the 2017 playoffs, so the last season's playoffs, Aaron Rodgers passed for more yards out of the pocket, rolling out of the pocket, in the playoffs than the entire rest of the teams combined that were in the playoffs.
Wow.
So, and these are some of the best teams in the league and the best defenses in the league by the time that you whittle it down to the playoffs. And this one guy had something like 276 yards passing outside the pocket compared to the rest of the teams, and they had like 150 yards. So it's something where he's very lethal. Now, you also said something that you don't think it was a dirty hit, but maybe that it was a deliberate hit. There was something, that every team is going to do when they face a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, who's dangerous out of the pocket, who's just dangerous, period, is they are going to try and send a message. And I do believe that Anthony Barr was trying to send a message that, hey, we're going to be here all day coming at you. I don't believe for one second that he was saying, I'm going to break your collarbone and send you out for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
You couldn't plan that. The way that they fell, the way that Rodgers went down sideways with one shoulder on the ground and Barr's full body weight fell on the other one, you can't plan that sort of a situation. But what you can plan is the fact that anytime we get a chance to get a little lick on the quarterback in a legal fashion, we're going to do that because it's going to change the way he plays the rest of the game. So I do think that they were trying to send a message that it was a deliberate hit, but it wasn't a deliberate injuring attempt, if that makes sense.
I read I was a little bit behind on my DVR when the game started, so I actually saw the injury online before I saw it on TV, and the national media basically said that made it seem like Barr drove him into the ground like a suplex style and put his full weight into his shoulder, but it was just such a normal hit. It didn't seem like that, like you guys said. So I mean, it's a testament to the fact that on any play, especially recently, it seems like, and I know Luke, you were going to look into that in regards to, there's some people thinking that maybe the new type of field or how soft or hard it is regarding how much rubber they put into it is contributing to injuries, just because it seems like there's a lot of injuries lately. But
yeah, well, in that game too, the Packers lost 6 players to injury. So
yeah,
and that was just an apocalyptic day for the Packers.
Yeah.
It just seems like with Dalvin Cook's injury and those injuries and the Rodgers hit was just such a normal situation that I don't know if it's the field or if it's just that these guys are getting so strong that their muscles are too strong for their bones, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and their ligaments too. I mean, there was the scenario for the Vikings has been this way all year long. I mean, they had the Cook injury, but they haven't been dropping like flies elsewhere. The Bradford thing is such an anomaly. I don't think you can blame that on the turf. Now, the one thing I wanted to ask you guys, I wanted to ask you guys because I haven't been able to confirm it. Aaron Rodgers walking off the field, very visibly cussing out Anthony Barr after that hit. Rodgers probably knew from breaking a collarbone before that he had done something similar to that this time around, and it was going to be a long time out. He cussed him out. Someone who will remain nameless tipped me off to the fact that in that sequence, as Aaron Rodgers was cussing out Anthony Barr dropped the discount double check wrestling belt.
I didn't see that.
I didn't see it either, and I haven't been able to check all 22 or anything to see
if
that was the case.
You think that would have been considering the penalty to what's his face from Denver who pretended to help the quarterback?
Von Miller.
Yeah, and blew that game. You think that if he did that, he probably would have got a unsportsmanlike?
Yeah, I mean they weren't right next to each other, so that might be the only saving grace there for an unsportsmanlike is if Barr's in the middle of the field getting ready to go to defensive huddle and Rodgers is walking to the sideline. So let's call it unsubstantiated, but I was tipped off to the fact that might have occurred.
So
which
gangster.
if it did, that's pretty good.
I'll love him forever if that's true. I did notice that he did immediately just get up and walk away, like he didn't try to help Rodgers at all. He just immediately got up and about faced and walked back to the defensive huddle. So maybe the cameras didn't catch it. That's
a Harrison Smith, Xavier Rhodes attitude. They do a lot. I mean, sometimes Xavier Rhodes will get up and jaw, but I see a lot of defensive players because those are the leaders. Except for sack dances and stuff, they'll make a play and then just get up and walk right away from you. And I feel like that's the best way to piss off a cocky wide receiver is to just beat him and just act like it's all business.
Yeah, and the biggest thing with the Rodgers thing was the high five when he was on the cart. I thought that kind of alluded to the fact that he was done for.
Yeah. that's when you knew that it was real bad. And he was getting carted off immediately, and then, I mean, the game wasn't even over when the Packers confirmed on Twitter that it was a broken collarbone.
Yeah. So what were your guys' thoughts on the game as a whole? I mean, obviously the defense played well. It seems like the defense, you know, and we'll touch on this in a little bit, but the defense is playing on another level. All the points they've been giving up have been on short fields after turnovers, it seems like.
I think we're 25%. We're allowing 25% of third downs to be. I saw that from World, who did a Reddit post. 25% of
and a post on the site.
And a post on the site, yes. But yeah, they're allowing 25% conversion on third down, which would be extrapolated to a whole season, would be the best rate in the last 25 years.
Oh wow, better than the 2000 Ravens.
In terms of third down conversion, yeah, better than all of those old teams 25 years back.
That's crazy. I know that they're, you know, game by game allowing something like 16.8 points per game. And obviously with a backup quarterback, backup running back scenario that we do have, and I'm sure we'll break that down later as far as whether that is an actual backup scenario at this point.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you can keep a team to, let's say, 17 points allowed per game, you're going to be in any ball game. And whether you have a backup at whatever position, you're going to be within the realm of scoring 17 points, and that should get you to win some games. Now, this one in particular, it wasn't pretty, I wouldn't say. It had a different vibe around it. There was no flow to it because of all the injuries, because of all the, you know, some penalties that snuck in there. It never really got going, and there were a couple turnovers deep in you know, Packer territory. I think Jerick McKinnon's fumble was, you know, like at the 15-yard line or something. Clay Matthews carried it back 60-some yards to get the Packers in business. So it could have been a much bigger blowout had it not been for some of those mistakes that the Vikings are continuing to fall into. But, you know, the Packers aren't a terrible team. So to go out and walk away with a 13-point victory, even without Aaron Rodgers, you know, you're in a scenario now where you go against a bad Ravens team. You go to London against the Cleveland Browns. Those should be, not guaranteed, but should be 2 wins. You go into the bye at 6-2. You split the rest of the way, and you're a 10-6 playoff team. So I like the scenario. I just wish that it would have, you know, again, Case Keenum, you're going to scheme for him now. You're going to have him as your starting quarterback for as long as they can, and hopefully game by game that continues to get better because there's room to improve there.
Yeah, it was really clear all day that the Vikings were the better roster, you know, and Aaron Rodgers masks a lot of problems on that, and he has for his whole time there.
Definitely.
And you know, you saw Brett Hundley, who I don't think played that bad. You know, his stat line looks a lot worse than I think he played. But, you know, you could see there was just a clear drop-off in quality. There were throws that he was missing, and you just thought, oh, wow, that's definitely a first down if it's Aaron Rodgers. And with the Vikings, the backups played a lot better. You know, we were in a situation where most of that game was backup quarterback versus backup quarterback, and it was very clear who the better offense was. And the backup running back, Jerick McKinnon, played pretty well, and as guys kept dropping, backups had to come in, and for the Vikings, they did less damage to themselves than the Packers backups did, especially the offensive line down the stretch, which was just getting worked. It was a long day for those tackles.
The Packers?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll touch on Keenum in a second, but I didn't add this to the agenda, which is my style. But I said something online this week that was I wanted you guys' take on it, and it was that, and Luke especially, because you wrote the article about Dalvin Cook and success rate a couple weeks ago and jinxed him for the rest of the season. How do you guys think that McKinnon?
I got Diggs too.
Yeah. Well,
I wrote about Diggs and he hurt his groin.
There you go. You're not allowed to write anymore.
What about Barney got a concussion? Yeah, I shouldn't write anymore.
Yeah, dude. McKinnon, with the fumble notwithstanding, which isn't really his style, is there a drop-off in play at the running back position at this point? I mean,
absolutely.
And is that because, well, you can just answer it. I was just going to say, is that because the line, you know, Cook was making the line look better than it was, but it just seems like McKinnon's been on fire.
He's been playing well. Dalvin Cook was dealing with much worse run blocking than Jerick McKinnon's been dealing with. I don't know what the yards before contact stats are, but you can just look at the tape and kind of get that the Dalvin Cook was dealing with much worse run blocking, and the run blocking has come together a little bit as the offensive line has gelled and gotten a little more chemistry together and played in more game situations. Jerick McKinnon hasn't been bad per se, but Dalvin Cook was really, really special, and there's obviously going to be a drop off. I think in terms of success rate, both McKinnon and Murray are somewhere in the low 30%, which is below average and not very good. But in terms of yards over expectation, which is another stat that I really like for running backs, which is basically taking every down and distance, like 2nd and 6, 2nd and 7, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, and looking at the average run at that down and distance and then measuring against that. Both Murray and McKinnon have been above average in that regard. So in terms of the down and distance that they've been asked to run in, both of those running backs have done better than other running backs in the league have done, if that makes sense.
Can you explain what the 30% means in regards to success rate?
Yeah, success rate is just it's another kind of down and distance related stat where if it's first down, it's a successful play if you got 40% of the yards. Second down, 60%, and then on 3rd and 4th down, it's 100% of the yards, obviously. And then it's basically just a yes/no. Was it a successful play when you ran the ball, and then whatever percentage of those plays. I think average is like 40-some. Dalvin Cook was rocking like a 54 when he went down.
Okay.
Which was very, very good, and success rate has definitely fallen below average with McKinnon and Murray. But the run blocking has been steadily improving, and that's encouraging. And I think there's a lot of evidence that the run game isn't like bad yet. It just isn't Dalvin Cook good.
Sure, and there's a couple things too. I appreciate advanced statistics. I don't understand all of them, so I'm glad that Luke's here to kind of break that down for us. But here's a couple things that
Pocket Protectors Pocket.
Just the naked eye can tell you. Jerick, in 2 games filling in since the Cook injury, has fumbled twice, and that's 2 times too many in a Mike Zimmer offense. There is still room to improve there. In that first game, he dropped some very open passes in a short 3rd down scenario that would have been an easy first down. So there's obvious room for McKinnon to improve. I do think that he has head and shoulders taken the lead in I don't even know if we can call it the starting running back or the number 1 running back, but he's going to get the lion's share of the carries because he is a little more dynamic than Latavius Murray. Murray brings the power where McKinnon brings the patience and some of the analyzing the scenario before you just kind of run through the hole. What Cook brought to it was that explosiveness that I don't think either of these guys bring to the table. There were 1 or 2 runs within the first 3 games that Dalvin Cook was quite literally a shoelace away from breaking a gigantic, 85-yard Adrian Peterson-esque run that would have gone straight to the house. And whether it's, an adjustment to, how you handle that open hole in the NFL, and in college he could get away with it. In the NFL, someone got to his ankle right at the last minute, or whatever you want to say it might have been in that scenario. He just couldn't break those big runs. But the main thing that this offense is going to miss, and again, this is just visually so obvious, is that outside run game where Dalvin Cook could get around the edge and really turn on those burners to get around that defender and turn what looks to be a stretched out 1-yard gain into a 8-10 yard gain because he can get around the one defender in open space, and then the secondary guys have to catch up to him. So that's going to be something that they have to figure out because both McKinnon and Murray are more between the tackle kind of running backs, and that just changes your offense a bit, and maybe that fits better with a Case Keenum than it did with a Sam Bradford, just dynamically speaking. So this whole offense is shifting almost on a week-by-week basis, pending injuries, pending who's going to be the quarterback and what they're learning about the guys that they do have.
Yeah, another thing you just reminded me about with Dalvin was his ability to produce missed tackles, because he ran the ball like he was running a route. They teach wide receivers to kind of shade to the inside if they're going to cut outside to kind of get the cornerback going the wrong way before you cut on him. And Dalvin Cook would do the same thing. He would kind of, shade to the inside of a blocker and then really, really expertly cut to the outside, and it would get the linebacker completely out of position. And that was just something he did that made him special, and it's what made him such a high draft pick. And you're just not going to get that with McKinnon or Murray.
So that was the nicest way you ever to tell me that was a stupid question. So I appreciate that.
It was a good talker, Joe.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for. So speaking of questions, at least, how's that for a segue? AJ wrote an article, was it Sunday night, maybe Monday, talking about Keenum and his play and basically saying, regardless who's healthy, the team should stick with Keenum, at least for the foreseeable future. Well, AJ, you can do a better job of explaining it than I can. I have a goldfish's memory, so that was outside my 2-day.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, I put it together on the cusp of Teddy Bridgewater coming off the PUP list. On Sam Bradford week by week status is still a question, but as this week has gone on, I don't think we've talked about Sam Bradford at all.
Yeah.
It was basically just kind of saying, given the way that this division has changed with that Aaron Rodgers injury, Case Keenum is consistent enough, comfortable enough, and safe enough to win you ball games when your defense is playing the way that it is and your offense is set up the way that it is. The teams have a tendency to, once a quote-unquote starting quarterback is healthy, to automatically put them back in. With the two starting quarterbacks that are unhealthy on this team, in Bradford and Bridgewater, there are other variables that get mixed in there that kind of scare me. The last time Bradford was supposedly healthy, he looked scared. He looked out of sorts. He couldn't do anything and was pulled before halftime after re-injuring that knee. Had that scenario happened against any other team other than the Chicago Bears, the Vikings wouldn't have been up 3-2 at halftime when they made that quarterback switch. They would have been down double digits most likely, and this is not a team that can fight out of a double-digit hole very easily. So the logic here being, Case Keenum is doing a good enough job right now. He's not turning the ball over too much. He could get a little better, but he's not turning it over too much. He's moving the ball up and down the field, and this team with its defense is capable of winning games with him at the quarterback. So until he goes out and proves that logic wrong, completely wets the bed, when Teddy Bridgewater gets healthy, don't automatically put him as a starter. If Sam Bradford were to get healthy, don't automatically put him in as a starter. Stay with the hot hand. Don't fix it if it ain't broke. That kind of mentality, just because there are some other variables that we just won't know about until Teddy gets on the field, and we won't know about until Bradford gets on the field, if he ever does again.
It's the Trent Dilfer comparison keeps coming up, it seems like. And I do think Keenum's a little more capable than Dilfer just because he can use his
That's
legs.
a bad comp for a bunch of reasons.
Yeah.
Because he's just such a different style. You won't get him, game managing his way through the playoffs. He's live by case, die by case.
Totally. And I feel like, and I've said this on the website too, I feel like not enough attention was paid to what a disaster the Bradford thing was on Monday Night Football. I said this last week, but I don't think I've ever seen that situation in my 33 years of existence where a quarterback was literally just laying down when...
quickly you forget RG&E.
Yeah, But
that's what I was thinking about. And he tweeted at halftime being like, hey, don't do the same thing.
So it was a disaster. I don't know. This entire Bradford thing, just to touch on that too, it's such a weird situation because, we still don't really know what the issue is. We hear after the Bears game that it's wear and tear, so people think it's arthritis, which makes you think, well, how can they fix that? That's just going to be a chronic issue. But I think you're right. I think that obviously I don't know if they felt that they needed to bring Bradford back because of Keenum's up and down play or what it was, but on the game Sunday, they mentioned that the first thing that the coaches said when they sat down with the guys in the booth was that about Keenum was that he doesn't blow the game. They weren't really saying good things about him. They were just saying he's not terrible, which to me makes me want, I still want a quarterback who the first thing the coaches say is, he's producing huge plays with our wide receivers and he's playing. I'm still kind of latched to how Bradford played against the Saints, and that might be unrealistic, but damn it, my whole entire existence is unrealistic at this point. So, I agree with it because they're winning and the defense is good enough to win. I just wish that we had a team that had that on both sides of the ball. You know what I mean?
I have so many conflicted thoughts about Case. Because, on one hand, I agree with you. If he's playing well, and then you have, unknowns in terms of how Teddy Bridgewater's knee is going to hold up or how Sam Bradford's knee is going to hold up, why expose yourself to that risk when you have somebody playing fine? And I also like Case Keenum. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, but then why did they do it if they really did believe in Keenum?
Because I think they had bad information. I think they thought Sam Bradford was healthier than he was. Like, you can't, like, open up that knee and look at it. I think they thought it was better than it was.
Sure, and the last time we saw Sam Bradford, it was the best game of his career.
Definitely.
Yeah, it was that Saints game. You want that back. But, like, with Case, he's also a high-variance quarterback, and there is something to high-variance quarterbacks. There was something on a recent episode of the Pocket Protectors podcast with Eric Eager, who was talking about variant quarterbacks versus, like, very consistent, like, checkdown captains, like old Alex Smith. And those guys have a low ceiling that can kind of, like, there's only so far they can take you. And with high variance guys that are very aggressive, there's a chance that you can get lucky and they string together 3 or 4 really good games at the right time and you Joe Flacco your way into a Super Bowl, which is a really, really strong argument in favor of staying with Case Keenum. But at the same time, like, variance and analytics and all that stuff, you can just watch him play and you see the high risk that you're exposing yourself to every time you start him, because he's an incredibly aggressive quarterback with a pretty weak arm that doesn't put the requisite velocity on a lot of his intermediate passes, and it exposes yourself to interceptions. The fact that we've only had one so far is absolutely an anomaly, and it's absolutely going to catch up to us. We're not going to continue to be that lucky.
Do you think,
so on one hand, it makes sense to, like, stick with a guy who's playing fine, but on the other hand, if it's incredibly predictable that he's going to eventually either melt down or just, like, regress to the level of play we know we've seen from him in, like, 30 or so games we've seen of him, does it make sense to expose yourself to, like, okay, we're going to have one game where he loses it before we take preventative measures? So I'm very conflicted.
Well, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong for the 5th time on the half an hour we've been on the air, but that he, either through design or through just an inability to play at a higher level, he misses a lot of wide open receivers down the field. Like, there was a specific play in the Packers game where Thielen did a double move and was wide open, and it's been brought up by the announcers that he's not doing his reads in the right order, and he's looking at the check down guy before the first option, and the first option's been open, whether it's been Thielen on that specific play, or I know Rudolph has been open a couple times down the field. Do you think
I think it's an arm strength thing.
Do you? Or
do you
think
passes.
The coaches are saying, hey, just don't do what you want to do and just take the conservative 5 yards?
With Shermer, that's certainly possible. But I think that with, like, at least throwing inaccurate deep passes, like, maybe, yeah, he should have thrown that sooner or whatever, but with throwing inaccurate deep passes, which he also does, that's a matter of not having the arm strength, so you kind of have to heave it. And when you heave it, you lose a little precision.
Well, and back to the turnover bit, too, there's been a half dozen times already where the wide receiver has turned cornerback and knocked the ball out of the defender's hands, and or the defender just dropped a very easy interception. So the fact that there's only been one, it might be an anomaly. Doesn't mean that the opportunities haven't been there for the defense. They just haven't turned them. And
we have 2 receivers that have crazy, especially Thielen, catch radiuses, who are making him look better than he otherwise would. But we touched.
Well, real quick before we move off of this, take this whole conversation one step further, because there's going to be a point where we're going to have to start talking a macro, micro, long-term, short-term conversation here, because the short-term answer, the short-term goal, let's say, is the playoffs this year. And Case Keenum might be your answer for that, to reach that short-term goal. But then you're counteracting that up against the long-term future of this organization and the question of what Teddy Bridgewater could or couldn't bring back to the table after a horrific knee injury. There's still potential that he's the quarterback of the future for this team. At what point do you put him out there to find out if he's capable of doing that anymore? And if you do it this year, are you risking the chance to make a playoffs, or is it giving you a better chance? I mean, there's going to have to be a decision at some point that is made that, there is either a perfect scenario against a team that we're going to beat no matter what, that we can kind of throw Teddy out there, but then are you knocking Case off his rhythm? There's more to it too, that you're going to have to look to the future, because right now there is not a single quarterback under roster or under contract for 2018, and that's going to cause some problems.
It's such a disaster, man, because I've been trying to avoid the narrative of Teddy versus Bradford for as long as possible.
Bradford's done. I mean, can the three of us agree on the fact that I don't think Bradford's going to play again?
I don't think he plays another snap in the NFL.
I don't either.
I think
he's a QB coach in 2 years.
I think rationally, yeah, especially if it's an arthritis thing. Like I said, I've been holding on to that Saints game, and I've been telling myself that Keenum will get us to, especially with Rodgers out, Keenum will get us to a division win with a couple games left, and Bradford can come back for the playoffs and kind of carry us through what seems to be a relatively weak NFC, in my opinion. A lot farther than I think people otherwise would have thought earlier in the season, but that's an emotional thing for me. I think, it's all the mystery surrounding it and how we played against the Bears. That was, like I said, was almost unprecedented, the way that happened. And Luke, I think you're right. I think they were surprised by that, and the injuries, which we'll get into in a little bit. Basically, they said Sam Bradford was nowhere to be seen at Winter Park this week, so it's not like he's rehabbing or is out there scheming with the offense for the week. I mean, he's just gone. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good segue to talk about Teddy, because obviously he came back to practice, and a lot of people that I interact with on our Facebook page or just in person at the gas station, which is my only social interaction at this point, basically said, well, Teddy's back, so he'll play in a week or two, and Zimmer came out and kind of pumped everyone's brakes on that and said, we don't really know what's happening, but then that's been kind of counteracted with was it McKinnon that said he looked like or no, it was Jarius Wright said he looked like a black Joe Montana.
Rudolph too. There were like multiple people saying that.
Yeah, I think
which is hilarious
on it. Yeah.
So I know, Luke, you're like a huge Teddy guy. And
I believe in him.
So
I mean,
what are your thoughts on him and him coming back to practice, and when or if you guys expect him to come back this season?
Yeah, you can still tell he's not quite there yet. He's still got a little. He's still not quite stepping into his throws the way I wish he was, but he's got quick feet. He's able to cut and plant the way you wish he did. So he's close, but I don't think he's there yet. I think you can ride Case Keenum into the bye, and then activate him so that you don't have to put him on IR or whatever, and then I think he'll come out after the bye when you can kind of like make that transition as smoothly as you possibly can.
Do you think he'll play after the bye?
Yeah, I do. I think he comes out either in the Redskins game or in that Rams game if you don't want to do it on FedEx Field. I think, I believe when I hear from the Rappaports and the Schefters of the world, and I hear Teddy himself say it, and I hear Zimmer say, I anticipate he's good. I to a degree believe that that's not all smoke when it's that many people. And I think they believe that he's going to be capable of playing. I think he could have, it would have been rushing him back to bring him in at the beginning of the year. And I think now is you've taken your time and now he's in when he should be in. I think rushing would have, now is not rushing. Rushing already passed.
Well, keep in mind that these are the same people that thought Bradford should play in Monday Night Football.
I think they rushed Bradford.
Big time.
Or did Bradford rush himself? There was this narrative that was popping up that Bradford was holding out of these games because of the contract situation that he was in. That the last time he was out there, he had a great game, and he didn't want to go out under any, less than 100% until the coach kind of called him out and said, this is a pain tolerance issue. And as soon as he's able to tolerate the pain, he'll be back out there, which in essence is to the media, to the public, calling out your quarterback and maybe forcing Sam's hand to at least take whatever vote that Sam had in that say to get back on the football field and push him to play. So, for Teddy, I was out there yesterday watching him practice. Like Luke was saying, he didn't look fully like himself. And I don't know enough about, those gigantic knee braces they wear to know what kind of knee brace it was first. There was a different kind of knee brace that Bradford was wearing that, Sugarman, when he gave his update to us, was talking. I forget exactly what the name of it was, but it essentially would push the knee back from the point where the pain was. So if it got to a point where, I can bend my knee this far or straighten it this far and then it starts to hurt, this particular brace would sublux that and push it back to where it is to kind of protect yourself from that pain. I don't know if the brace that Teddy was wearing is similar to that. he looked a little stiff and all we really saw was them doing their warm-ups, and then we got to see him do a couple handoff drills, and we saw him throw one pass to a quarterback's coach that was wearing a baseball mitt, and then another pass to Kyle Rudolph, and that was it. That's when they closed the media availability.
Was he limping at all?
He didn't seem to be limping, but when he did like the high knees, he couldn't get his knees as high as everybody else. And I just don't know if that's Teddy slow rolling in, if that's the knee brace kind of constricting him from doing that, or if that is just what we're going to get from Teddy. I just don't know if that's going to change and get better, or if that's where we are and that's what we're going to have to deal with. He mentioned today at his press conference that his upper body's a lot stronger, and I did definitely notice on the couple passes we saw him throw that they had some zip behind him. And there was always that thought about Teddy that he wasn't really able to throw strong, and to the point where he threw his arm out in training camp last year, trying to maybe overcompensate for some of that. So there are some things there. But at the end of the day, if he is, the calendar schedule kind of works itself out so that they do play 2 winnable games maybe without your starting quarterback. You have a bye, and that's right at your 21-day window to activate him off the PUP. So he's obviously an improvement over Kyle Sloter, even if you put him in as the backup quarterback for the foreseeable future until Keenum, opens the door. Or, like Luke was saying, you open up that opportunity for him to play against the Redskins or the Rams.
Yeah, my biggest thing with Teddy...
And you can always, sorry, Jed, real quick, you can always put Bradford on IR, which I think is in the cards, just to get Teddy activated and get out of this weird pup clock situation, and then actually put him into the game at whatever pace you want.
Sure.
I was just going to say that one of the things that, as someone who's been labeled anti-Teddy, that stuck in my mind was the previous podcast that me and Joe were on with someone from the Vikings World Order. We were out at the Mermaid, and we had Tommy Kramer on the show, and he, granted, was 3 sheets to the wind, which was Tommy Kramer, personified, which I really enjoyed. But he... in between literally singing complete country songs from beginning to end on air, the bridge, the choruses, everything, he said that as a quarterback watching Bridgewater, the way he throws the ball isn't conducive with the deep ball. He has the kind of the fastball or the sidearm a little bit too much, and I know they've worked on that. I've seen them working on that in training camp when I've been down there. And maybe that's part of why his arm went out, AJ, was because they were trying to adjust his throwing motion. But I know that he's obviously an upgrade over Case Keenum. It's just I fear that with Diggs and Thielen and this deep threat that we have, that we're going to revert to the 2015 Vikings, which obviously Luke and I have argued about why they've done this. But, just dumping the ball off and not going for larger chunk plays. Whether or not that was because of Adrian Peterson is a different issue, but I don't think he's as complete a quarterback as Bradford is. Now, if Bradford goes on IR, he's going to be done. His contract's over. If we activate Teddy, that changes the dynamic with his contract and having to renegotiate that earlier than perhaps they otherwise would have. But, I just want to go on the record to say that, and I've done this a million times, and this is part of why the site exists, because Reddit hates me for saying things like this, but I just don't think Teddy, at least as the last time we saw him, which he was still developing, is the quarterback that could take this team as far as Bradford would have.
Yeah, I will say that Teddy Bridgewater is a much more capable deep passer than Case Keenum is, just because Case Keenum, if we think Teddy Bridgewater had an arm strength issue, Case Keenum has a worse arm strength issue. There's definitely, we've been debating for a year and a half about Bradford versus Bridgewater. I really don't think it's going to come up. I really don't think we're ever going to actually have to make a bona fide decision between the two healthy quarterbacks. I think it's always going to be obvious because of non-skill related reasons which quarterback you go with. And after all of this debate that we've had since we're blue in the face, it's going to be rendered completely moot by circumstance and knee injuries.
Definitely. And that sucks.
It's very Vikings.
At the beginning of the season, I said I don't want to talk about this, but it is a dynamic that I don't think we're used to as Vikings fans, which is having 2 young, under 30 at least, capable quarterbacks that we have to deal with. We've obviously there's that stat where we haven't had the same quarterback year to year since 1978. Now we have 2 starting level or top 10 quarterbacks, maybe. I don't know if you want to put Bridgewater in that category or Bradford, but totally, it's just the Vikings. I think we can just use that as an argument moving forward. It's just hashtag Vikings when it comes to stuff like this. And that's actually a good segue into some of the injury stuff. I know I talked about, obviously Bradford's a no-show. He's not going to play Sunday, but there's been some other injuries, obviously, that Luke touched on with Barr and Diggs. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about Easton and his injury and where he's. If AJ, if you know where he's at with that, since you've been over to Winter Park, that kind of brings up the issue of Alex Boone, which we've talked about on the show being just like a shitty move. Not really blaming the team, not knowing what happened. If he just said, I'm not going to take a pay cut or I'm not going to sit on the bench, let me go. But that sucks if Easton's out for a while, because it did seem like the line was coalescing a little bit more than they were earlier in the season. Like Luke said, the run game had better blocking than they did with Cook, which is to be expected because Easton, obviously hasn't played left guard before in the NFL, so it was going to take him a while to get going. But where's he at right now?
As far as Easton, Easton hasn't practiced for the last 2 days. And obviously when they're not out there, even in the 10 minutes at the beginning of practice, we don't get to see them. That typically means that during that media time, they are in the training room getting some rehab done. And if they are close to returning, they're kind of on that opposite extra field doing an individual workout with one of the assistant trainers, kind of monitoring that situation. We haven't seen that yet with Easton. So, Searles filled in admirably. I mean, we didn't talk about him. And when
I disagree with that. I thought it was a disaster.
Ooh.
Wow,
he gave up like 5 pressures.
Okay, but I mean, the pressures are one thing too, and Keenum has a knack, and I don't know if this is a timing thing on his part, where he will hold on to that football until the last split second. And I haven't watched back enough to know whether that is the offensive line, letting that pressure in quicker than normal, or if it's him holding on to it. But he will hold on to it. He'll step up in that pocket to those pressure sort of situations, and at the very last second get rid of that football. And most of the time he'll hit that receiver or that tight end, because that extra split second has allowed them to get that space in that opportunity. So when we go back to talking about Easton, even going back to talk about Boone, and you guys may have a different opinion about this, there was more that went into Boone's release than just his poor play. I mean, that guy was not liked in the clubhouse.
Yeah.
And I do wholeheartedly believe that along with the contract and the poor play were the reasons that pushed him out the door. And I don't know what the drop off is from one to the other, but I don't think this team is worse for getting rid of him.
My thing with not to get into it too much, but my thing with Boone was that he was the only capable guy we had last season because of injuries. Granted, he was hurt this preseason, which I think obviously hurt him. I think his comments, perhaps his comments on the Kaepernick situation didn't help him in the locker room. You would think that this guy who is boisterous and wants to be a leader would have fit in, but that obviously didn't happen. It just seemed like, and like I said, I know there was probably a lot more to it than anything, and it was out of their control. But it's like when we just got some depth, we got rid of it, and it just seemed like we worked so hard this offseason to get that depth and made all these moves, and then we lose that depth, and now it's kind of coming back to haunt us, and that's not necessarily anybody's fault outside of Boone. It just, again, my point in writing for this team and being on this show is to say, again, hashtag Vikings. It just sucks.
Yeah, it just sucks, and I don't think that it was the way it all went down, and the way that, like you said, AJ, the way that Boone was kind of regarded in Minnesota, it just didn't seem like it was a situation where we could keep him. Like it wasn't made on the merits of having depth or having a play. It wasn't made on the merits of like trying to build the best roster. It was definitely, there were other things going into it. But I do think one thing that can make you a little bit more comfortable with releasing Boone is that, like, if Easton goes down and Searles, like, yeah, just to expound on that more, I think he gave up like 5 pressures and there was a lot of difficulty run blocking from his side. And like you said, Case Keenum's pocket presence did a lot to erase that, which was really good. Case Keenum had excellent pocket presence as much as he was inaccurate all day. He was really good at evading pressure and negating it. But one other thing that you can do is try to slide Berger to left guard, and you know he can play there, and try to give Danny Isidora a shot, who had a pretty good preseason and is starting to be active because of the Easton injury, and I think that might be something that you could see them experimenting with in practice, or hear about them having experimented with it in practice because they do it when the media isn't able to be there. So that might be one way to mitigate it if you're dissatisfied with Jeremiah Searles' play. So it's not, I don't think we're stuck with Searles. I think that's always going to be an option there, and there's some other shifty, slidey things that we can try to do, or try to bring somebody up from the practice squad that we liked in camp or whatever. But yeah, with the whole Boone thing, it really just sucks, and I don't think that there was as much of an option to keep him as we hoped there would be. Obviously it would be better if we were able to just slot Boone right in when Easton goes down, but I just don't think that was an option.
And speaking of offensive line, Luke, I know you wanted to touch on, and we're going to actually touch on this next week. I know that we're going to have a writer for the Browns, or a podcaster and writer for the Browns on the show to fill in for Joe next week, and I think you said, Luke, that he really wants to talk about Everson Griffen and Defensive Player of the Year, and so we wanted to touch on a little bit the fact that Pro Football Focus this week said that the Vikings have the number one defense in the league, and a big part of that obviously has been the defensive line, and namely in Linval Joseph and Everson Griffen, and specifically in regards to their play against the Packers offensive line and how that dictated the flow of that game a little bit outside of obviously the Rodgers injury.
Yeah, so this week, Brett Kallman, who has a great YouTube channel that you should definitely check out, did a video about the Packers offensive line, and it was titled "How the Packers Get Away with Holding on Every Play," which, and it really, they do. And they do it in a way that is purposefully designed to get away with holding, and it works. So it's kind of hard to fault them. But basically, they use something called the hug technique, which usually as an offensive lineman, you're trying to get inside leverage because it's easier to push on a defensive lineman when your hands are inside their hands. Because, you're not trying to go around shoulders and stuff. But offensive linemen historically have become pretty bad at that because of college and high school schemes being different and all kinds of other weird factors.
Spread offense.
So the Packers, spread off, weird stuff like that. So the Packers have been coaching their offensive linemen to actually swing their arms way out wide and grab onto the shoulder pads. Basically, use good footwork, which the Packers tackles have very good footwork, to grab the defensive lineman's shoulder pads and kind of stay face to face and right in front of them, square with their shoulders. And to a referee, it doesn't look like holding because you see, two linemen engaged with each other, stalemated, and standing right in front of each other. And they won't call holding like that. They won't call holding if you're pushing on someone and you grab a fistful of jersey, but you're pushing. And that's what it looks like to a ref, so they'll never, ever, ever call that holding. So then the video goes on to basically illustrate how the Vikings are the one team that has figured this out. Packers used last week, or the week before, they used it to neutralize DeMarcus Lawrence, who might be the best pure defensive lineman in the league right now. He's just playing out of his skull for the Cowboys. But the Vikings have figured out how to counter this by basically bull rushing through it, because if you're going to swing your arms way outside, you give up inside leverage, and now it's easier to get kind of blown back. The Packers are pretty good at anchoring when they lose leverage, but if you go in bull rushing just balls to the wall, which is what Everson Griffen and Danielle Hunter were doing on Sunday, you could basically just blow right through all the tackles and get pressure on every play. And they had, I don't know what the pressure rate was on off the top of my head, but I do know it was ridiculous. And both Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffen were just terrorizing Brent Hundley all day, worse than they have been for other games. And it's why the Vikings are able to sack Aaron Rodgers a lot when other teams have not been able to.
AJ, you got any thoughts on that?
Sorry. No, I think it's an interesting thing, and this you sent I forget what the author's name was. The article sent to us a little bit earlier today, Joe, about the pressures that they were bringing with the A-gap blitzes and just the exotic, just different packages that Mike Zimmer brings to the table.
World. World.
Okay. Yeah, it brings me back to the very first time that I ever met Mike Zimmer. He invited the writers. He had just been hired. It was still during the off season. He was hired as the head coach, and he invited us to Winter Park for a pizza party where he sat us down. He ordered pizza, which got everybody to show up, obviously, and he walked us through tape. And the tape was of the Cincinnati Bengals, obviously, because that was the team that he had coached for. And he explained his scheme as best he could to a bunch of writers who pretend like we know what we're talking about when we're putting our articles on the web or in the newspaper. And through that scenario, he was talking about not only the importance of Damatapeka in Cincinnati and the Linval Joseph kind of role here in Minnesota, being maybe the most important part of that defensive line in the way that they put the pressures on, they eat up those blocks, they keep the linebackers clean. But then he talked a lot about those A-gap blitzes and how he likes to bring up Anthony Barr, on this year's roster, Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks, both outside the centers, and confuse that offensive line with where the pressure's coming from. Are they both going to come? Who's going to block who? And that frees up those guys on the edge like Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, and or a Harrison Smith or Anderson Dejo kind of sneaking up for the outside blitz. That's a great way that this team has kept offenses who study the Minnesota Vikings on their heels and not really knowing exactly where the pressure's coming from, when it's coming, and part of it too is drafting the right players. You draft guys like Hendricks, like Barr, who have the ability, and even Everson Griffin, to drop back in coverage. These guys are great rushers. They're great guys to get to the quarterback, but at the same time, they're athletic enough to drop back in coverage and stick with the tight end, stick with a running back out of the backfield. So that you have that variability to kind of do all these different things with those players across the front, and that's how you keep those guys guessing, and that's how you keep them surprised and shocked when you bring the pressure from whatever side it's on. So that's another thing that kind of factors into that and the success not only against the Packers, but when you see the success against other teams as well.
And you got a couple of free Harrison Smith sacks out of that. And just an addendum on what I was talking about, for Week 6, Everson Griffin, Danielle Hunter, and Brian Robeson were all top 15 defensive ends in terms of pressure generation.
Wow. And that's obviously going to be a big part of the game this Sunday. We have a few minutes left, so we'll kind of touch on the Ravens just a little bit. I just wanted to get your guys', and I think I know where this is going. Actually, first, I should say that the article is by World, but his name is Nick Olson. He's a new writer for the site. I did want to shout him out because he's really, really good at what he does. And also, I just realized that World would be a perfect name for initials. So, just putting that out there, AJ.
There we go.
But yeah, what do you guys think the keys are to taking down the Ravens this Sunday with the team that we obviously are going to play with? Not sure with what's going to happen with Diggs especially. I would hope he'd be back.
It's a weird
Go ahead,
thing.
AJ.
For the first time, you typically see a guy like Diggs go out. I'm not super worried, and I don't think it necessarily has to do with the fact that you're facing a lowly Ravens team, but I'm not really worried whether Diggs is going to be out there or not. Obviously, he helps this team.
And Floyd's out there too, I should mention, or he was out at practice.
Yeah, and that hasn't been anything much of anything for the Vikings yet.
Yeah.
I'm kind of disappointed with the way that's worked out too.
Me too.
But just Adam Thielen is, every week I feel like I'm tweeting about my man crush on Adam Thielen. How this guy, he doesn't do anything wrong. He continues to, give every little bit of effort. I look back to that play where he was stopped short of a first down. He was spun in a circle before he was tackled to the ground and ended up stretching and reaching for an extra 1.5 yards, 2 yards. I still think he came up shy of that first down, but just that extra effort, that giving 110% kind of cliche, that's the picture of that is Adam Thielen. And then he goes out and he continues to dominate and catch every ball you throw to him. It's just an impressive thing. So having Diggs there gives you two of those guys, one on each side of the field, one that can do something out of the slot, one that can do something out wide. When it comes to the Ravens, they have a good defense still. Some of those guys are getting older, but then they bring in Weddle and they have some other opportunities there. Joe Flacco is going to make or break this game, and when I say make or break, I don't necessarily mean determine whether the Vikings win or lose. I think it just determines whether the Vikings blow them out or the Vikings win with a semi-comfortable lead. I'm pretty comfortable in the fact that they're going to win, but if Flacco plays the way that he did last week, the Vikings could blow him out of the water, given the way that their defense has been playing and the offense is steady enough to get some points on the board. I just think that it's going to be tough for the Ravens to generate points, especially if Flacco's throwing multiple interceptions and no touchdowns.
And we do every week kind of like a prediction thing, like a score prediction. I don't know if you're into that sort of thing. Me and Joe have a rivalry, like a season-long sort of James Brown, Howie Long sort of situation. So I know you mentioned, do you think the Vikings are going to win or could potentially even blow them out of the water? But do you have any sort of, I'll just fold these in two things into one. So are you predicting a Vikings win? And if so, is there a score range you want to put out there?
Yeah, I think they do win, and you can determine whether this is a blowout or not, because I don't think it's your traditional blowout, but I think it's like a 24-10. So you got multiple scores, double-digit win. It's going to be comfortable. I think that maybe
one of those that feels like it should be, like feels like it was closer than it actually was, or like the score is closer than the game felt.
Yeah,
one of those.
Similar to the Packer game last week. Yeah,
exactly. I was going to say at halftime they said that it's a 3-2 game, but in regards to time of possession and yards, the Vikings should be up by double-digit points, and that seems to be, I think, what's going to happen with this offense, especially if they continue to turn over the ball. Luke, do you want to go, and then Joe texted me his prediction for the week, and we can talk about that.
Oh, great. Yeah, I agree with you, AJ. This Ravens team this offense is bad. I just don't see how they move the ball against the defense unless they come out with a game plan that we totally weren't expecting. The defense is good. I think, they'll be able to, they should be able to generate some turnovers with no Diggs and, with Case Keenum. But I don't think that it's going to be enough. I just don't foresee the Ravens offense I think Mike Wallace is questionable, so he'll either be not playing or not 100%. Rashad Perryman is gone, and Joe Flacco isn't nearly good enough to elevate any talent around him. If anything, he brings it down. I also foresee, I think we're going to be talking about how Mike Zimmer didn't blitz at all this game, because you don't really need. No, my prediction. Okay. I'll get to it. Okay. Joe Flacco is skittish in clean pockets. He looks like a thrown into the fire rookie out there. He's throwing horribly inaccurate passes. I mean, he is a disaster. He's nowhere near even the guy that was
got
a fluke in 20.
A small contract.
Yeah. So I think the Vikings defense is going to be able to hold Joe Flacco under 150 yards. That's going to be my bold prediction for the week. Yep. And I think it's going to be a relatively comfortable Vikings win.
Yeah, I'm in the same position as you guys. I was going to say, AJ, even before you brought it up, so thanks, that I think it's going to be closer than it should be just based on Keenum and the fact that he does miss a lot of these chunk yards. But the defense is just playing at such a high level. They're actually playing like they did before the bye last year, which is holding people under 20 points and putting us in every game. And I do think that outside of injuries, that we'll be in every game this season because of that defense. So it just matters how the offense is performing. Joe predicted.
You want to know how last week went for you guys?
Yeah, I was going to say Joe
didn't go well for you, Joe.
I know. I had it backwards, which I thought was good, and then I realized it was bad.
Oberle had 24-23, so he only missed the Vikings by a point, and he gained like 10 on you.
Oh, well, bye. His prediction this week is 24-13, and so knowing that and pulling the Price is Right maneuver, I think I'm gonna have to go. Despite the fact that this is the completely contrary to what I just said, I'll say 30-10 Vikings. Just because
30.
I need
some defensive touchdowns there.
Yeah, I need to make up some ground. So it's a complete sleazebag move, but you guys know in dealing with me that's how I like to do business. So 30-10, I'm not too worried about this game, to be honest. I think that it'll be...
I think it's going to be an ugly game for sure. It feels like with these two good defenses, it's going to be one of those games where there's some sloppy, weird crap that goes on. And it's probably going to end up with one of those weird, 19-9 scores where there's some weird missed extra point or some stupid crap that goes on.
Some old school leather helmet football score.
Yeah, there's a safety or something weird like that. It's going to be an ugly game, but in that regard, it should be fun. One of those kind of slugfests.
I feel like it's Case Keenum's been like good and then bad, and obviously he came in at the end of the Bears game and played well, and then he kind of fell back to earth against the Packers. So I feel like he's due for a big game to get everyone all excited. Granted, everything that I say, the exact opposite happens. So we're not going to win the Super Bowl, is my prediction.
I haven't predicted the Vikings game correctly in terms of win or lose since week 2. So
yeah, and to bring this up too, Joe has predicted us winning every single week this season. So
yeah.
I only predicted that we would lose against the Packers, which obviously didn't happen for other reasons. But yeah, with that's kind of, we've covered all the topics. I want to thank AJ profusely for coming on the show and spending an hour.
Yeah, good to have you, AJ.
With us, man. It was
thanks, guys.
It was amazing. You can check him out every morning on 100.3, the best morning show in the state of Minnesota, and I would say in the Western world. You can check out Luke on our site. He posts every Tuesday. AJ posts an article pretty much every Sunday now, which has been amazing. And I post every single day, so people can just avoid that. But check out the post by Nick Olson, World. Check out our sponsor, Anderson Windows and Doors. They are still hiring. If you actually apply to the job on the site, you will get an interview, and it pays really well. It's like $16.50 an hour, so check that out. But that's been our show for the week. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter at Vikings or at purplePTSD, and check out our sister site, VikingsTerritory.com as well. And we'll be back next Tuesday with, what's the name of the guy from the Browns?
It's Jonathan Kinsley. He goes by Brickwall Blitz. Okay. That's the name of his blog and his Twitter handle. And he does the Deep Ball Project every year. You might have heard of.
Oh.
Where he charts every deep ball and grades it subjectively. It's all his opinion. But he also charts like average depth of targets and completion percentage and all that stuff. So it's a really good post every off season.
That's amazing, man. So we didn't even need you.
And he's a Browns fan.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, guys.
But
yes, he has a lot of thoughts on Case Keenum and Teddy and Sam. So I look forward to hearing from him.
Awesome.
Nice.
All right. Well, thanks again, AJ, and thanks everyone for listening.
Hey, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot for the time.
Thanks, man.